Welcome back everyone. Hi, if you're new, I'm Tori, and today we are finally going to be talking about my top 10 best books of 2024. In all of my years doing this video on my channel, this is the latest this video has ever gone up. I have never posted this in January before, but I do have a couple of reasons for that. And the first one is because I finished my #1 book of the year on New Year's Eve. And the second reason is because a little bit after I finished that book, I got very sick, lost my voice, and it's now slowly starting to come back to me, but it's still not 100%, but I feel good enough where I can finally sit down and chat about my 10 best books of the year. Before we officially jump into the list though, I do have a few things to run through if you guys are new here, if you found my channel in the last year or so. And the first thing is that this is a top 10 ranked list. No matter how many books I read in a year, I will always pull out my top 10. I just feel like that's a good clean cutoff number. And a top 10 list just really forces me to think about what was truly the best of the year. So it's always gonna be a top 10, no honorable mentions, and that's just how I do it around here. And the second thing, again, that this is ranked, so we're gonna start at number 10 and work our way down to the #1 spot, or up to the #1 spot, whatever. And the books are just gonna keep getting better and better as the video goes on. And a couple other things to note is that I don't include rereads on my top 10 list, and I also do not include multiple books in a series in different spots. I feel like that just could get pretty redundant after a while. And just in general, you know, even though this is a top 10 of 2024, it doesn't mean that these books were published in 2024, although a couple of them were. It just means that I read them in 2024. Let me know if you guys have read any of these. Let me know, and just in general, what your favorite books of the year were. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's get into my top 10 books of 2024. So to kick off the top 10 list, at number 10, I'm putting The Reformatory by Tananarive. This was amazing. This is actually the earliest book on this list that's making my top 10. I read this all the way back, I wanna say in January, so it's literally had the privilege of sitting with me all year long at this point. And it's one that I, really enjoyed at the time. And it's kind of weird to say that you enjoyed a book like this because the subject matter is so dark and it's so heavy. So I don't mean it like that, but it's just one that has sat with me all year. It's one that has just, really crept up on me over the course of the year. For that reason, it definitely deserves a spot in my top 10. And just even beyond that, anything Tananarive does for me at this point, I feel like she's just not gonna miss. This is my third work from her. And actually the other two books that I read from her, The Good House and My Soul to Keep, also made my best of the year list in the year that I read those. So she is just incredible. If you still have not read anything from her, please let 2025 be the year that you change that. The Reformatory is a work of literary horror, a literary historical horror, and it takes place in the Jim Crow South in Florida. And we have two main characters who are siblings. One of them is Robbie, and Robbie gets sentenced to this reformatory school after he has an encounter with this white boy who was messing with his older sister. So he was defending his sister, gets sentenced, and from there, Robbie is not only dealing with supernatural horrors at this reformatory, but also the very real horrors of racism. He's just trying to do what he can to survive, not lose his mind, and at the same time on the outside, his older sister Gloria is trying to do everything that she can, use her smarts, rally her resources, do everything she can to get her brother out of this terrible situation. I've said this about other books that I've read from Due at this point, but I really love the way that she's able to weave in some just really eerie and really intense horror themes onto situations of racism, and the way that it's just done so unflinchingly in her books, especially in The Reformatory, just really makes a story like this unforgettable. So The Reformatory was just incredible. Again, if you guys still have not read anything from Due, let this be the year. You can start here, pick up The Good House, which is my highest recommendation. I love The Good House, but also My Soul to Keep was incredible, but Reformatory was amazing in its own right and deserves a spot in my top 10 list. At number 9, I'm putting Asunder by Kirsten Hall, and this is probably one of the weirdest and most unique reading experiences that I had in 2024. This was such a great recommendation. Another one that has just been sitting with me since I finished it because I'm just so impressed with how the world building unfolded in this. I love how atmospheric it was. I mentioned this before, but there are just some moments in here that truly read like some kind of fever dream. Like you're just sitting there thinking, what am I reading right now? Why is this so creepy? I really can't explain it, but there's just this kind of persistent eeriness to this story and this world that never really lets up, you know, the farther that you get into it. And it got to a point where this book just left a lasting impression on me, and it also made me that much more curious to pick up more of Kirsten Hall's work in the future. This is a fantasy novel, dark fantasy novel, and we have our main character, Karis, who is a death speaker, and quite literally she can speak to the dead, and she uses that ability to do whatever she can to get by, just survive pretty much, take odd jobs here and there. And the book kicks off when Karis is doing just that. She's out at this crime scene trying to figure out what actually happened, and when she's in the process of leaving, she bumps into this other character named Farain, our other main character, and she accidentally ends up binding this character. It's so much more than this. It's a little more complicated, but she ends up binding Farain to herself, to her shadow, and from there the two of them are trying to figure out how to separate without doing harm to the other one. And it just becomes this really eerie, intricate, interesting journey that they take together as they're going from place to place around this world, trying to, you know, get clues of how to be able to separate from each other as they're bringing more people into their group, and those people have their own interesting backstories. So yeah, overall, this was just amazing. It's definitely one that I want to revisit in the future, whether I physically reread it again or, you know, one that I experience via audiobook. But I do want to go back to the story eventually, and I also want to read more from Kirsten Hall. This was just a really unique reading experience, a really nice surprise, so definitely belongs on my top 10 list. At number 8, we actually have two, because I couldn't separate them, and you'll see why. They just go together. But at number 8, I'm gonna put The Jade Setter of Janloon and Jade Shards, both by Fonda Lee. The Jade Setter of Janloon is a novella, and Jade Shards is a short story collection. I think a lot of you may know this already. I've said this so many times over the course of this channel, but the Greenbone Saga is my favorite fantasy series of all time. Looking back on finishing Jade Legacy, I can't even really explain now what that feeling was like. I don't know, it was just like maybe a bittersweet feeling, but it was just like emptiness. When I really think about it, it was this empty feeling of like I just experienced something unforgettable, incredible with the Greenbone Saga. It was kind of scary thinking about if I was ever gonna, or if anything I would read would kind of match that in that way. And there is a series I think that's getting close, which we'll talk about in my number 1 spot. But the Greenbone Saga for me is just, it's an indelible trilogy. It's just such an incredible reading experience. And so it was getting to the point where I was like, whatever Greenbone crumbs Fonda Lee wants to give us, I will take them. And I feel like we got that with Jade Setter and Jade Shards. My recommendation is do not read these if you have not read the trilogy. Like, why would you want to? Don't read it. Yes, it'll make sense. It's a cohesive story, and then you got the short stories. You'll know what's going on, but it's not gonna mean anything. It's not gonna hit the same. So in Jade Setter of Janloon, as I mentioned, it's a novella, and we have a brand new character that we don't know from the trilogy, and he works in a jade shop as an apprentice, and they, you know, work on Greenbone weapons, and they can like reset jade in the weapons and everything. But one day a character comes into the shop, and we know this character from the trilogy. They come into the shop and they need a weapon fixed for another character that we also know from the trilogy. And the apprentice, he's like, yeah, I got it, no problem. Like, I'm gonna fix it, and you can come back on this day and pick it up. It's gonna be all good. And that night, the shop gets broken into and that weapon gets stolen. And the main character, I was stressed out for him. He is stressed out trying to figure out who broke into the shop, who took this weapon, and why. And it leads him down this rabbit hole. It leads him around Janloon. We get such a cool cameo from another character that we do know. So again, it was just so fun. It was such a nice treat, and just felt great to be back in that world again. And then when it comes to Jade Shards, this is a short story collection, like I mentioned. We have stories in here from when Mata was younger. We get a story about a young Andon and another character I'm not going to spoil. We get a story about Shay that happens a little bit before the events of Jade City, the first book. And we also get a story about Hilo and Win. As a Greenbone fan, you guys, you just can't beat it. So if you love the series, please do yourself a favor, treat yourself, go pick up these two. They were incredible. And then coming in at number 7 is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke, and this is book 1 in the Magic of the Lost series. Book 3 is slated to come out sometime in 2025, so I'm really excited for that because this is already off to such an incredible start with just this book 1. I thought this was amazing. This is a high military and political fantasy story, and it's inspired by the French occupation in North Africa. And I think C.L. Clarke just does such an incredible job taking the messiness of colonialism and all the different elements of it and just boiling it down into two really just nuanced and complicated and frustrating main characters in Terrain and Luca. Even though they're both considered our main characters, I would consider Terrain to be like the main character in all of this, but it definitely is about both of them. So Terrain was stolen from her homeland of Kazal as a child, taken by the Empire, and she was raised by the Empire to be a soldier on their behalf. And so she was raised with their training and thinking, their customs, their language, and over the course of her life thus far, she has gone out on these different military campaigns to, you know, do their bidding across the world. But the book actually kicks off when Terrain and her unit have to go back to her homeland in order to stop this rebellion that's been brewing. Being back in her homeland, she feels like a fish out of water among her own people. She views them through the same lens that the Empire does, and just that when you're in Terrain's head, you can really tell that the Empire has done some serious damage on her thinking and the way that she views these colonies. And so you just kind of get all of the messiness of that with her being back in her homeland and not knowing the language and, you know, being a soldier amongst her own people. And then on the flip side of this, we have our other main character, Luca, who is a princess of Balladeer, and she is also in Kazal, Terrain's homeland, trying to also stop this rebellion, but she has her own motivations. She's trying to get her uncle off the throne, and by stopping this rebellion, she can prove that, you know, she's competent, she has the ability to lead, and it's time for him to get his butt off the throne pretty much. So they have the same end goal, but they have their own motivations, and it just gets more complex and again just more frustrating and messy as the book goes on. I think this is an amazing story. I think the way C.L. Clarke handles it and handles these complicated themes, I thought it was really well done, and I enjoyed this so much that I went out and bought the second book, The Faithless, and I hadn't even finished this book at the time. I will definitely be continuing on with the second book this year, and again, I'm just really excited for that third book to come out sometime later in 2025. And then coming in at number 6, you guys, is such a great sequel that is On Vicious Worlds, and this is book 2 in the Kingdom trilogy, and actually book 1, These Burning Stars, made my best of the year list in 2023. So I always love it when a sequel can follow suit and be just as good and also make a list like this. This was just amazing. This is a sci-fi series, and I feel like I've been screaming about These Burning Stars for a while now and just how much I love it, how incredible it was. And On Vicious Worlds is just an amazing sequel that serves as a really great bridge from book 1 to what's going to be book 3, This Brutal Moon. I love this, but I do feel like I need to set expectations for this book, especially if you are coming off of These Burning Stars and you're just like still on the high that was that book and the whirlwind and all the twists and turns and things like that, especially the ending of book 1. These Burning Stars was so good, and I think it was just the combination of all of the action and the new world building and kind of the sci-fi politics and all of that I think is so fascinating. We also were introduced to one of my favorite just ruthless and messy characters in These Burning Stars. So it just left such a big impression on me. I love that book. And so coming into On Vicious Worlds though, it's good but in a different way. While the first one was so fun and explosive and we were introduced to just that out-of-pocket character of a Sec Nightfoot in book 1, On Vicious Worlds, I would say, has a really different tone to it because now the world has blown open, but we're really now focused on the hierarchy of the kingdom, kind of like the power structure. We get so much deeper into the politics of this world, and that is the core of what this book is. Things are really heating up in On Vicious Worlds. Our characters were headed to a destination at the end of the first book, and by the time we open up On Vicious Worlds, they're there. They've been settled for a while now, but there's already some disruptors kind of wreaking havoc here and there in this new location. And so we have the leaders of the location trying to figure out who's doing it and why, like what's going on. And then on the other side, we have characters who are removed from this situation, who are really entrenched in the politics of the kingdom, and you really get to see the lengths that these characters will go to hold on to their power, and just do whatever they can at any cost to get more power. And that's really what On Vicious Worlds is about. I love book 1 so much, loved it, and this is, I think, just such a worthy follow-up. So loved it, highly recommend. Definitely give this series a chance if it sounds good to you. But now, you guys, let's get into my top 5 best books of 2024. Coming in at number 5, this one just feels really special, really bittersweet, because not only is it the finale to what is now one of my all-time favorite fantasy trilogies, but the 2 books in the series before it also made my best of the year lists in the years that I read them. So it just feels like a little full circle moment, and it just deserves it. It's incredible. And that is The Trials of Empire by Richard Swan at number 5. Again, this is the final book in the series. This is the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, and this whole trilogy is incredible, but this final book in particular, I think, just really nails the landing. I couldn't have imagined where we would have ended up, at the end of this series, but it was just fantastic. The whole reading experience of this, the whole journey, I think, just culminates so well in a final book like this. This series starts with The Justice of Kings. Book 2 is Tyranny of Faith, and we have 2 main characters in this series. One of them is Helena. She's this young woman who's an apprentice to one of the powerful justices in this empire, Justice von Walt. You learn in The Justice of Kings that Helena is actually telling the story with some distance. She's looking back on all of this, telling us the events of this trilogy from someplace in the future, and telling us how she and von Walt had a hand in bringing about the end of the Empire of the Wolf. And it starts as this kind of like mystery, almost detective story, with some great fantasy elements in book 1. And then as we start to move into book 2, it becomes just a wild horror novel. And then in this one, it is all out horror and fantasy and just some great genre blends. But at its core, this is a series that deals with themes of morality and justice and law versus religion, and they just get more amplified as the trilogy goes on. And by the time you get to The Trials of Empire, it is just all hell has broken loose, and our characters are, especially Helena, is quite literally trying not to lose her mind and just try to maintain that moral compass and her sense of goodness, while at the same time watching her mentor von Walt have to do immoral and evil things in order to stop a greater evil from occurring. It's so great. I love how all of that is handled over the course of this trilogy, and I could not have asked for a better ending in The Trials of Empire. This was just, it made the journey worth it. Absolutely incredible. If you guys still have not picked up this trilogy, please do yourself a favor and go check it out. So yeah, Trials of Empire belongs in my top 5, and this series as a whole is now one of my all-time favorites. And then coming in at number 4, hang in there with me, guys, because I feel like my voice is starting to get strange now, but coming in at number 4 is Demon in White by Christopher Rocchio. This is the 3rd book in the Sun Eater series, and it feels actually kind of weird to say that this is book 3 because I feel like I've read so much in the Sun Eater universe at this point now. I've read 3 in the main series, I've read the 2 novellas, and I've also read one of the short story collections. So I have been on this Sun Eater journey for a while now, and it has just been phenomenal, just all the way through so far. And to be on this journey and to finally get to something like Demon in White is just one of the best reading rewards that I can think of in recent memory. First off, I love this entire series. I loved it from Empire of Silence. I feel like I picked up Empire of Silence at the absolute perfect moment. At the time, I was just reading so much fantasy, and I was at a point where I was just almost like craving some sci-fi, like not just any sci-fi, but I was craving like an epic sci-fi story, epic sci-fi world building, all of that. I was also watching a lot of Dune Part 2 at the time too, but I was just kind of in that space, and Empire of Silence just got me at the exact right time, and I immediately fell in love. And you guys were telling me if you love book 1, the series is just gonna get even better. And then I got to Howling Dark. Howling Dark was perfection. The last, I would say, like 100 pages of Howling Dark, some of the best stuff that I've ever read. I love Howling Dark. And then you all were saying, okay, but Demon in White is even better. And I was like, how are we gonna get better than Howling Dark? And somehow we ended up doing that. This is an incredible, incredible piece of sci-fi, and it blends so many different things to perfection. This is blending philosophy and history, religion, action, space opera themes, and politics, court intrigue, and it's just great. It is just great. I feel like it's a little corny to be like, this is why I read science fiction, but this is why I read science fiction, to get to a book like Demon in White. And just the farther along I get in the Sun Eater series, the more in awe I get of how this is all being plotted out and how it's all outlined, because there are things that happened in Empire of Silence that are still being mentioned in this book, or things that happen in Empire of Silence that are just now occurring in this book. And it is, I mean, the outlining is just masterful at this point. It is really incredible. This is a framing narrative, and I've, said several times while talking about this series in the past that I just love how future Hadrian knows when to come in and kind of insert his future knowledge into a particular scene and let us know up front who's the enemy, who sold him out, and just the way it's done and when it's done, it just makes such a huge impact on every single scene where that is used. I love this. Somehow it just gets bigger and bigger as we go on. This is a really large time skip from Howling Dark, but now in this one we see Hadrian in a different position, different situation, where he's more like a fish out of water and trying to, he kind of comes from this world because he is a nobleman's son, and he did kind of have that training on Delos, but it's a completely different ball game to the situation that he finds himself in now, and having to try to navigate court politics. He doesn't really know who to trust in this particular environment, and it's just a fish out of water situation. He doesn't know what people's motivations are. Just even on top of that though, the Cielcin threat is getting more intense, it's getting darker. Things that are really important to Hadrian's destiny overall as the Sun Eater is coming into play in this book. It is, I love this. I feel like a broken record at this point, and like I feel like I'm just rambling, but this is truly epic, truly incredible. The Sun Eater series has just been one of the best reading experiences of 2024 for me. So Demon in White for me is the best of the series so far, but overall I just love all of them. Probably more than I can put into words. So if you're still on the fence about Sun Eater, if you're still sleeping on this series, I need you to stop it. I need you to wake up and go get Empire of Silence and start this journey. It is so worth it. The novellas are also incredible. I loved Queen Amid Ashes. It's all great. Now you guys, coming in at number 3, this book was actually my number 1 book of 2024 for pretty much most of the year until early December. All that changed when we're going to get into my number 2 book that sadly bumped it down, but that does not mean that this is any less incredible. I have been seriously yapping about this book all year long. I've been thinking about it since the day that I finished it, and I am desperately awaiting the sequel. But my number 3 pick, it can't be anything other than The Will of the Many by James Islington. This book took over my life in 2024. I think a lot of people tend to focus on the ending and oh my god, it's just so incredible and mind-blowing. And yes, 100% it definitely is. But I love the entire journey of this book. I don't know what it is. There's something about it. And I said this in my review of Will of the Many. I am not someone that hears like school setting, academia setting, and I'm like, oh, buzzword, I'm drawn to that. That doesn't really do it for me, but I love the way that it is done in here. And just even aside from that, we just get some really incredible world building in this. The kind of foundation for The Will of the Many, it's nothing you haven't seen before. If you are a fantasy reader, we have this republic and they've gone around and they've conquered all these different places. We've seen it a million times at this point, but I'm always looking for how an author is going to put their spin on it, how they're going to make it unique. What are they going to do? What's the magic look like? All of that. What's the structure look like? And James Islington just came out and blew me out of the water with it. We've got this really incredible system called Will, and I'm so excited to get more in depth with it in book 2, but just what we got as the foundation in book 1, I just thought was fascinating, and just how it works and how people can see their will. It's really, the more I think about it, the more I just love it. I just love this book so much. So our main character in this is Vis, and he is from one of the last places that was conquered by the Republic. He's just been trying to do what he can to survive, do what he can to get by pretty much. And one day he gets this opportunity from someone pretty important. gets an opportunity to study at one of the most prestigious, or not one of it is the most prestigious academy in this republic. But this opportunity does come with strings though, because once Vis is there, he has to find out, you know, do what he can to find out information for this person. But at the same time, he's doing some things to his own advantage too. And so throughout the course of the book, you're seeing Vis at this academy, seeing how competitive it is, and seeing how students can be manipulative and work their way up in the rankings and stuff. And just, I don't know, it's good. It's good. I don't know what to say about The Will of the Many. It left a lasting impression on me. I just was in love with this book before I even hit the 100-page mark, and it just kept getting better and better and better as the book was going on. And one thing that I love about this book, aside from the ending, because that was just, what did I read? But aside from that, I feel like this is such a strong book one in a series, and it leaves you with just all good questions about, you know, what's to come in the sequel, and not questions where you're kind of frustrated, like, that was stupid, like, this should have been answered in book one, what's going on? It's just all good stuff, and you feel like the seeds have been laid for this series to really blossom into something incredible. I'm just obsessed. I could continue to yap about The Will of the Many, and I actually will, because the Strength of the Few is on the way. So I will continue to talk about Will of the Many. We're going to prepare for Strength of the Few on this channel together, and it's going to be a good time. But Will of the Many, hands down, top book of 2024 for me. This was absolutely incredible. And then next, you guys, in my number 2 spot, this is one just incredible book. This is another series finale, and now one of my new all-time favorite fantasy series. Just one of my new all-time favorite authors. She has become an auto-buy author for me. This series is just everything. It is everything, truly phenomenal. This is a book that I finished in early December, and when I finished it, I was like, I am so sorry to The Will of the Many, but you're gonna be bumped down. And I thought this book was gonna be number 1 until I finished my number 1. But yeah, Will of the Many got bumped down because of this one, and this just deserves my number 2 spot, and that is none other than The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. And this is the 3rd and final book in the David Bad trilogy. I love every single thing about this series. Every single thing. The world, the storytelling, the characters, the politics, the history, just literally everything, every element that makes up this series. I love it. And just the way that it all unfolds and ends in Empire of Gold is one of the most emotionally draining journeys I think I've ever been on. One of my now favorite characters of all time is in this series, and it is so unfortunate that I cannot even say who it is, because they don't even really come into the mix until the 2nd book. They're mentioned a lot in book 1, but they really get going in book 2. And this character, to see their arc just in the 2nd book, but especially throughout Empire of Gold, it's one of the most heartbreaking things I think I've ever read. And this character, you're reading it and you're like, okay, I can recognize that this is supposed to be the villain, but this character in particular, all the characters really, but this one especially, they're so layered. There's so much more to them. They have so much history behind them, a history of their family being done wrong and seeing their people lose everything, and now they've come into a position in this series where they have the chance to take back power, and they want to do it by any means necessary. And every time this character got more and more extreme over the course of Empire of Gold, I felt my heart just break a little bit more, because it's like, man, I know, I get why you're doing it, I completely understand, but at the same time, you gotta go. It's kind of that situation over the course of this book that is such a strong tug on your emotions as a reader. I think it's incredible. I'm gonna use emotions a lot when I'm talking about this book, but it's not like in an angsty way. I think this is such an emotionally mature series. Characters who have emotionally mature conversations, characters whose actions are always justified and they make sense for their characters, and their philosophies and ideas make sense given their backstories. Everything is just so well done in this, and I just really applaud Chakraborty's storytelling and writing skills to be able to balance all of the complexities of that. Not only balance characters' complex histories, but also do that against some really intense political strife and trauma and political bloodshed that has defined this world of Daevabad for so long. I love this. I could just go on and on and on about this series, especially Empire Gold. I love this so much. I just realized that I didn't even say what this series is about. So if you are new to the Daevabad trilogy, this is a Middle Eastern inspired political, very political fantasy series. And we have a few main characters and perspectives that we get, but kind of our main character and our anchor for the entire trilogy is this young woman named Nari. And Nari, she is this Khan woman from Cairo. And in the first book, she accidentally summons this Deva named Dara. And pretty quickly, Dara is like, you know, I don't think you're really from Cairo. And so he ends up taking her to the magical city of Daevabad. And Daevabad, they have all these different tribes. And these tribes have their own kind of intertribal politics and their own complicated and rich histories with each other. And it's just this magical place. But again, it's a place that has just seen so much turmoil and political strife over the years and so much war. And you have characters from the past who were part of that and who really can't escape the deeds that they have done or the things that were done to them because of this war and all of this political turmoil. And then you have our kind of more like younger generation with Nari and our other characters like Ali and Muntadir, who are trying to create stability but also find the best pathway forward that, you know, is a little different from the history that they all come from. And I've also read the short story collection River of Silver. Love that too. Perfection also. And it's just not enough for me at this point. I need like a little World of Daevabad coffee table book at this point that has like family trees and long histories and artwork and stuff. So Chakraborty, for some reason, if you ever stumble upon this video, I'm gonna need that. I just love it. This is, again, a new all-time favorite fantasy series, just absolutely phenomenal. And my reading year would not have been complete without it, so this absolutely deserves to be in my #2 spot. Finally, you guys, let's get into the #1 book that I read in 2024. This is just, I don't know, I felt this way when I talked about the first book in this series, which actually also made my best books of the year video. I made it in 2023 and it was also in the #1 spot. I just vividly remember talking about that book and introducing it as my #1 book of the year, and I'm feeling those same feelings, but they're kind of heightened because this somehow was so much better than the first one, and that one was already phenomenal. So this series is just, this series is on a different level. I'm truly in awe of what this author has been able to do over the course of these first 2 books, but especially in this one. My #1 book of 2024 is The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu. I feel like I don't want to repeat everything that I said that I loved about The Grace of Kings. This is just, I don't know what to say about this. For some reason, the books in this series thus far have been leaving me a little speechless. And I remember talking about The Grace of Kings and I called it a masterpiece and phenomenal and blah, 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 all those great things, and it still is. Grace of Kings is still the best book that I've read. Well, now this is the best book I've read. But I said all those great things, all that high praise for The Grace of Kings, and it's like, well, what's higher than the masterpiece? What's higher than the phenomenon? And whatever that is, it's The Wall of Storms. And this is the reason why I read. This is why I devote a full month and almost 900 pages to a book, is to have a reading experience like this. This is, I hate to be the one to say it, but your faves are not doing it like this. This series thus far is, for me, in a different league of fantasy. This is epic in every sense of the world, not even just in like scope and storytelling, but just from a writing standpoint. It is different. I love this so much. Reading The Wall of Storms, it puts everything that happened in The Grace of Kings, but also the structure of The Grace of Kings, it gives a little bit more, it puts it into a little bit of a different perspective and you understand it a little bit more. The Grace of Kings is just a lot. It's like kind of a whirlwind of just everything going on. Ken Liu, it's very fast-paced, and Ken Liu, he's just introducing characters and places, and here's the problem, and this is what characters are doing to rise up and start this rebellion. And I mean, it's just, you get this full picture of this rebellion, and you have plot points that are being done in like paragraphs and storylines wrapped up in a page, and it's just a lot. The Grace of Kings is actually a little chaotic when you look back on it, and I've said this before as well. I think Ken Liu's skill in his craft as a short story writer makes something like The Grace of Kings possible, and you understand why a structure like that is necessary to continue on with this series. And now when we get to Wall of Storms, we're in a place now where the writing feels a lot calmer, but the actual story that's happening is just epic and more intense and just so ruthless. I mean, we definitely still get, you know, the moving around to different places. We get flashbacks in this one. Now the people of Dara are experiencing a new threat from far away, so we are in that place too. But in terms of writing, it's not that kind of moving around and boom, 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 and here's all of these like 50 people in about, you know, 5 pages. It now feels like it's just, the story is just flowing at this point. We got what we needed from The Grace of Kings. You realize that that was just the foundation and like the strong setup that we needed. And so now this is where we're really getting into it. And there's so much going on in this. I mean, it's almost 900 pages. Of course, there's a lot going on, but now we're in a relative like time of peace that's trying to be sustained. And that's even a little shaky because there's like infighting and manipulation going on and one character going behind everybody's backs. And so they're dealing with all of this mess, all of this infighting in their own house while this new threat is approaching and about to make things a million times worse. And this threat is gonna force the people of Dara to just really shift and change in some really unprecedented ways. And it's so great. It is so great. I mentioned that this is epic in every sense of the word, you know, epic storytelling and scope and characters writing and all of that. But at its core, this still very much feels like an epic history. This is watching the people of Dara try to fight for what they love. We get all of these really interesting schools of philosophy up front that feel a little bit overwhelming at times. We get a lot of these different schools of philosophy and how that can really shape someone's thinking and define their leadership. I don't know, you guys, this is just great stuff. It really is. One thing that I find interesting and that I really love about this series, and this is not a negative towards it at all because I just said I love it, I'm not like overly attached to any of these characters. I like them. I understand what they're trying to do. I understand their motivations because they're really clear and just strong and they're well-written characters. But I think I'm so much more drawn to like the actual history of Dara, the way that the islands are changing, the threat that's coming in and trying to impose new ideology and all of that. I think that is so much bigger than all of these characters that kind of feel like moving pieces over the course of the story. Don't get me wrong, they're incredible characters. I don't mean it like that. And even just how the gods are involved in all of this, I think is so incredibly well done, especially the ending and just how the gods view the people of Dara when they choose to interfere and when they don't. I think is incredible. I think it is just incredible. I don't know. I'm a broken record when it comes to this series thus far, but in particular Wall of Storms, this is it. Grace of Kings, Wall of Storms, they are just now 2 all-time favorite books in their own right, but just to be part of a series like this, this is on track to be my all-time favorite fantasy series when all is said and done. This is, I said it about Grace of Kings and I'll say it again here about Wall of Storms. This is a masterpiece. So that is it for me, you guys. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. That is a wrap for me on 2024. Usually I end my best of the year videos like see you in 2025, but I waited way too late for that this year. So welcome to 2025. I want to just wish everybody a happy belated new year, and I'm just excited for what lies ahead in 2025 for us. Just excited for some great content, great book releases, and still going to be incorporating all of these